Kyle, thank you for saying that because no one gets that. No one that
Yeah.
I'm like, no, time, when you're going
No,
through this,
time
especially when
stops.
you're younger, time
Yeah.
is compressed, and it's like a week
Yep.
feels like 7 years, not seven
Yeah.
days.
Hello and welcome back to the Ignition Path podcast. I'm your host, Kyle Goodknight. I'm so happy for you to join us today. I'm here with Nick Prefontaine, who was an individual I met on a pre-call, of course, because I make sure I have pre-calls with everybody that comes on my podcast. So if you're out there in podcast world and you want to come on my podcast and you don't want to call me first and get to know me and me get to know you, then just, maybe find some other podcast. But Nick, how are you doing today? Nice to see
I'm,
you again.
I'm outstanding, Kyle. I'm so excited we were able to fit this in.
Yeah, absolutely. I appreciate the flexibility that you've given me over the last couple of weeks with all of this. So I really appreciate that, and I'm super happy to have you on. Your story and your path, your entrepreneurial path, kind of hit home with me because everyone knows, and I usually mention this on my podcast, that there's some connections with who I have come on and some of the background that I have in my full-time job, which is as a paramedic. So your path kind of comes along those lines. That your injury that you'll share with everybody, kind of started you on the entrepreneurial path from how I remember our discussion. So real quick, just tell everybody who you are and just give us a short scenario of what brought you through your entrepreneurial path and what you did beforehand. And then, of course, your incident that caused that. And then we'll get further on into the show after that.
Yeah, sure. So, very excited to share this because I don't get the opportunity to go as in depth as I would like to, and down certain paths, if you will, of the story. And with you being a paramedic, it's super applicable, and to share how that all fits in my entrepreneurial path, I think your listeners will really relate to it, really like it. So. My story, my origin story, if you will, all starts when I was at ski club with my friends in 8th grade. And my friends and I had all brought our snowboard gear onto the bus to get ready so we wouldn't miss a precious moment once we got to the mountain. So we got to the mountain, and the rest of the class wasted time. They headed inside and took their time and got ready, but not us. My friends and I, we were ready to go. So we hit the chairlift, and on the way up, the chairlift went right over the terrain park where all of the jumps were. I knew as soon as I saw it, Kyle, that I had to go off the biggest jump in the terrain park. So I got to the top, buckled into my snowboard, and took a breath of that crisp winter air and confidently charged towards that jump with all my speed. Going up to the jump, I caught the edge of my snowboard, and that's the last thing that I remember. So I was told that I landed on my head. I wasn't wearing a helmet. There were three things that enabled me to really be able to share this story and talk to you today, which one of which is, although I wasn't wearing a helmet, I was wearing a pair of goggles, and there were a lot of padding on the goggles. They were spies. They were called spies, if you're familiar, or with any of your listeners are. So they had a lot of padding, and I learned that not only did they brace my initial impact, as I continued to roll down the mountain and hit my head, because I didn't just hit once and then it was done. As I continued to roll down the mountain and hit my head, the goggles mysteriously moved and I believe not so mysteriously, because I believe everything happens for a reason. So they moved with each impact and braced my fall. That was the first thing. The second thing, which I think is why I really relate to you being a paramedic, and I'm sure you'll appreciate this. So they wanted to bring a helicopter to the mountain to rush me to the hospital. They couldn't because it was too windy, so they had to send in an ambulance. Out of all the paramedics in the county, there was only one who could intubate on the spot, and I needed that to be able to breathe. He was one of the paramedics that showed up to the mountain that day. And there are still several things that I can't explain because of my accident. And now I know it's one of the reasons why I'm here telling this story today. The third thing, once I got to the hospital, the doctors communicated to my parents that I'd been in a snowboarding accident. suffered a traumatic brain injury. Based on the impact alone, I would have been out for 7 to 10 days. I already had swelling in my brain, and the doctors were worried that if I woke up and panicked, it would increase and then I would have died. So, because it was already so high. So they had to partially induce me into a coma. And when I was resting in the ICU, I was out. So I was resting in the ICU, and the doctors, through no fault of their own, came into my room to share progress updates with my parents on how I was doing. And the only people that were allowed in there at the time were my parents because of the severity of my injury. So the doctors, no fault of their own, started to tell them the news and the not so good news, not so good news, not so good news. And they went to share that right in front of me because they figured out, wait, what's he gonna care? He's in a coma, he's out. So they started to share it, and my mom stopped them. She said, no, not in front of him, because she understood that even though I was in a coma, Kyle, I was still taking in information. So she made the doctors step outside my room, and once they're outside my room, that's where the doctors shared that he's in a coma. We don't know how long he's going to be in the coma, and even if he's going to come out, um, even if he does come out, however long it is, there's a good chance that he's never going to be able to walk, talk, or eat on his own ever again.
Hmm.
And because none of that got through to me, none of that influenced me, whether subconsciously or unconsciously, where if the doctor said that in the room, like with me right there, who knows if the outcome would have turned out differently. So
Right.
because I didn't know any of that, what it enabled me to do is I was in the coma for 3 weeks, and I really don't remember a month because it was a partially induced coma. They had to slowly wean me off of the medication that helped save my life. And after a month, I was transported to a rehab hospital in Boston, and that's where I started my journey. And I've learned and I've kind of done this work, and with a mentor of mine, I've learned that I unknowingly used a system to not only make a full recovery, but run out of the hospital. And that's the STEP system. So STEP is an acronym. It stands for support. You got to make sure you have the support of your family and friends. This is going to have you falling back on relationships that you built prior to your setback. T is trust. Trust that once you take your first step, your next step is always going to be available to you. This also starts with trusting that calling, that voice in the back of your head that you have inside of you. You have to follow that. And I'll get into that, how that relates to my entrepreneurial journey a little bit later. And then E is energy. Energy, by maintaining your energy, you allow your body's natural ability to be able to heal itself. And then P is persistence. So once you take your first step, keep getting up every day and taking your next step, no matter how small. By continuing to move forward every day, you are building an unstoppable momentum. So if you fast forward a little bit, less than 60 days later, after being transported to the rehab hospital in Boston, I realized my goal of running out of the hospital. And after running out of the hospital, it really wasn't like my work was done. I had to continue to go to outpatient therapy for another 6 months, along with being tutored all summer long, 5 days a week, in order to continue on to high school with the rest of my classmates. And Kyle, looking back on it, it's a little surreal, but only 18 months after finishing rehab from suffering a traumatic brain injury, I got my start in real estate. It was door knocking, pre-foreclosure doors. So homeowners that had received a notice of default letter from the bank, and I would go and get a list of these and knock on their door and try to set up meetings with our investor to meet with them about potentially helping them out of their unfortunate situation. And looking back on this, I can see that it was a part of my recovery, going
Mm.
door to door, helping people out of their unfortunate situation. If you kind of move forward past there, I graduated high school, got my real estate license, started helping buyers and sellers as a realtor. And then in 2014, my dad, Chris, started buying properties, not 2013 and 14, started buying properties non-conventionally without signing personally on bank loans or using big down payments or investor down payments. And he came to me, hey, would you be able to help me market these and get these on the market? Because I'm getting all these properties, but I don't know what to do with them. And after wrestling it, figured that, oh, I can do that right alongside being a realtor. And over the course of 14 months, my income shifted where I was making the majority of my income helping him as an investor. So it didn't make sense for me to keep my real estate license. And really in 2012, I developed a voice issue. It was almost like I couldn't even speak. It was like hard to get the words out, if that
Mm.
makes sense. So I started, and I don't even think I told you about that on our
No, I don't think so. Because yeah, my
yeah.
my my first initial being a restorative therapist as well. My first initial thought process is how many years after your injury was that downfall of your voice, because there's vocal cord dysfunction that can happen with long-term innovation. So yeah,
Yeah, it was approximately 9 years.
yeah,
Uh
it's something separate.
yeah, yeah, that's all right. So I had that happen to me, and then I finally wound up, I developed that in 2012. I wound up in a voice specialist office in Boston in 2013, August of 2013, and I started receiving Botox injections into my vocal
Mm.
folds along with their higher level speech therapists. And I had to get those several times a year. And all the way to the point where my last injection that I got was in February of 2020. So obviously that has worked its way out of my system. You would never know talking to me now. Through our real estate coaching and consulting and training company, I've also had the opportunity to tell my story several times. It's only been, Kyle, 15 or 20 or 25 minutes max. And someone saw me speak at one of our events almost exactly 5 years ago in 2019, and I was still going through the final throes of my voice issues. So I was still having issues with my voice. It was still kind of tight. However, I spoke. She saw me speak and approached me after and said, hey, I love your story, gave me her card, and said, I'm not trying to steal you from your family real estate business or anything. However, if you're ever looking to fine tune your message and bring it to another level, so a higher level, so you're able to impact and affect the most amount of people possible, I can open some doors for you and introduce you to a few coaches and mentors of mine. So, like I said, I was going through the final months of my voice issue, so I wasn't ready yet. However, I always hung on to her card, and a little over a year and a half later, I finally reached out to her, and I said, "Okay, I'm ready. What should I do?" Back to the voice in the back of your head. You got to listen to that. So ever since I got out of school, I've always had this voice, no matter what I'm doing, which is saying, like, whether it's door knocking or helping buyers as a realtor, helping sellers as a realtor. Yeah, okay, that's great. You're making money and everything and being successful. But what you really need to be doing is helping trauma survivors get through their trauma and thrive with the rest of their lives. So no matter what I'm doing, that voice has always stuck with me and it's always been in the back of my head. However, since I reached out to Sharon, the one who gave me her card after hearing me speak in 2019, I reached out to her in May of 2021. She put me in touch with her mentor, Trisha Brook, who's become my mentor. Since I had that first phone call with her, there's been no voice in the back of my head. What that's evidence to me of is that I'm doing exactly what I was put on this earth to do.
Right.
So that really led me to, and the entrepreneurial journey. This is what, because each one of each time I tell my story, each show is different, and I get to highlight different aspects and different elements of my story. So here, when I had that call with her for the first time in May of 2021, I shared my goals with her and what I was looking to do. I said, do you think that's possible?" Or something to that effect. And she said, "Absolutely." And I said, "All right, what do you recommend?" She said, "The speaker salon, which is you get to commute to New York City for 6 weeks in a row. You get to be on stage with up to 10 or 12 other speakers for 5 weeks. And then on the 6th week is the showcase, and you perform for influencers, TEDx organizers, and people who can book you to speak." So it was just a wholehearted yes for me. I said yes, and she said, "All right, that's 25,000." So this is where the entrepreneurial journey comes in. I said yes, absolutely. It was not even a doubt in my mind. And then during the speaker salon, halfway through, she pitched me on what it would look like to work with her one-on-one. And she told me that she works one-on-one with speakers to help them build out their speaker platform. Kyle, I didn't even know what a speaker platform was. Um, I, However, I said yes. And I said, I don't know where I'm going to get the money, but give me a week, because she said that's 75,000. So I went and applied for financing, and I was approved. And I started working with her in the first half, January to the end of July of 2022. And she's the one that helped me launch my company and really do everything that I'm doing today. I have heard of. Um, she's helped me with it, in other words, and she's helped me establish it. The step system, what I unknowingly used to not only make a full recovery but run out of the hospital, she was the one that pulled all of that out of me. And now I'm speaking and telling my story to brain injury associations all across the country for 45, 50, 60 minutes. And before her, I would have never been able to even do 20 or 25 minutes. That was the most I would do.
Right.
And now it's kind of taken on a life of its own, and we're able to be helping so many people by sharing my message and the step system with the world.
So this STEP system you speak of, was that something that was an acronym for something that you dealt with inside the rehab hospital, or was it something that through that process and then getting further on in your process of speaking, that you remembered the time back in the hospital and the steps you took to get better and then created that yourself? Or was that something that you created, or was that something that was already in place that you kind of reallocated towards your message?
It's a good question. It's how I approach and really tackle any kind of obstacle. It's what I've always done, what my family has done, and what has been instilled with me since I was a little kid. Like, this is how you approach obstacles and get over things. She asked me when I first started working with her, Kyle. She said, "All right, so you got in your accident, you were in a coma, and then you ran out of the hospital. How'd you do it?" I said, "Well,
Good.
I don't know.
Baby steps. Yeah.
Yeah, I just got off every day and did the best I could and just kept doing something, kept working and getting better,
Yeah.
and I'm here." And she goes, "No, that's not good enough." And
Yeah.
she just
Yeah. Isn't
kept,
that funny how coaches like bring the message out of you? I'm a coach myself, and I've talked to several of my clients, and they're so blocked, and you need that coach. And that's another great thing that I believe that the Ignition Path podcast shares with people in general, especially when I have fellow coaches that come on and talk about their path and talk about what they do and talk about having mentors and being coached well. or educated well, or, coach, meaning to be a good coach, you have to be coachable too. Wouldn't you agree?
Mm. Yeah, absolutely.
So like you have to understand that you've been coached by somebody good, but then when you turn into a coach, you have to say, okay, I am still coachable. I'm never outside of the coaching possibilities. I'm never going to get to the point where I can't be coached about something in my business and my relationship, in anything in my life. I can be educated / coached for, and then I can take that content and repurpose it with my message or with my spin, if you will, for lack of better terms, to help my client or my friends or, my relationships in general. So, that is that's a great story. I mean, the hardships of the injury, you know, I've been injured many times in my life, nothing of the head and the brain injury. So I understand setback when it comes to physical injuries, and I've had 3 reconstructive shoulder surgeries, 2 reconstructive knee surgeries, an Achilles tendon rupture. I chopped off part of my finger on a table saw one day and was out for 3 months. And I understand that the path to get back is steps. Like you literally I can't raise my hand until I have the physical therapist move my arm and get my motion back. So there are steps. So your step system is so simple, and that's why I like it. It's so simple, but yet so profound. And it's one of those things where, working in the ICU as many years as I have, not only am I a paramedic, but I'm also a respiratory therapist that dealt with level 1 trauma center injuries. So I would have seen Nick come in if he would have came to my hospital. I would have been there. I would have been the one breathing into his ET tube that the paramedic intubated him. If I was on that run, I would have intubated him on that hill. So I understand all the intricacies of everything he went through. I have seen people come into the hospital with brain injuries and from falling out of a tree stand. I live in Ohio, a lot of tree stand injuries in and around Ohio during deer season. It's inevitable, right? And I had just a quick story about if anybody is ever feeling down on themselves about an injury or about recovery or the steps you have to go through something. I had a friend of mine fall off a roof. He went through the rungs of the ladder, and he broke and had a compound fracture of his leg. So I don't want to make anybody sick, but a compound fracture is when the bone comes through the skin. So pretty devastating leg injury. And I'm talking to him one day. He's in the ICU, and he's really down on himself. And he's just, what am I going to do? What am I going to do? And I'm like, bro, listen to me. I have got 6 patients that fell out of a tree stand that hit their head, and they're done. There's literally nothing we can do for them. We're waiting to see if their brain is ever going to come back. And most likely it won't, okay? It's because when you have a traumatic brain injury, everyone, it is the worst of worst injuries. Because not only does it affect your immediate stuff, but it can affect the rest of your life. I know Nick knows this, but he has a lingering issue that he could have some other malfunction. He had one in his throat. Our brain operates everything in our body. Later on in life, something could happen with Nick that was caused from his injury 20 years earlier that is just now rearing its ugly head. So a traumatic brain injury is a lifelong and a life of healing. And, so people that are out there feeling sorry for themselves or feeling like they can't do this or they can't put their step forward and they can't take the next step or do the next hard thing, trust me when I tell you, understand Nick's concept of the step and just take one step at a time and focus on what's in front of you. And the next thing you know, you stack those and get going better. So, Nick, anything else real quick about that in general? I mean, I know, like you said, you're going to have a little bit different conversation with me being in a medical background and understanding how significant this man's life is right now, and that he turned it into helping others. It gets me. It gets me. It's emotional to me. I'm proud of him. I'm supportive of him. I can't wait to get to know him better as the years go by. I will never not be in touch with Nick from now on because of the connection of not only this podcast and what podcasts do to connect people, but because of both of our backgrounds kind of having this overlap. And I want to become a public speaker myself. I'm already kind of a public speaker when it comes to EMS, and I go out and train and I go out and do stuff, but I want to be a full-blown public speaker someday on the side of the mental health of the first responder. So with that being said, knowing that I'm going to need coaching, I'm going to be tapping into him, be like, hey, introduce me to that gal so she can pull my step system out of me, so.
Oh, she's she's amazing, and I'd be happy to make the introduction to her. A couple closing thoughts. So what I covered and what we covered, Kyle, is really just a 10,000-foot view of the STEP system.
Mm.
However, to get the whole STEP system for free, uh, any of your listeners can go to nickprefontaine.com/step and
That'll be done in post.
download the entire STEP system for free.
Wow.
And you're going to learn all about support, trust, energy, and persistence. Like I said, we only went over the highlights.
Right.
But
We only
each
got a half.
one of
Yeah,
those,
we're only dealing with a half an hour here. Yeah.
each one of those has bullet points and ways that you can potentially apply it to your life and your situation.
Right. So real quick, just another question or two. When it comes to your entrepreneurial path, and it sounds like because this happened in high school, you never really, I mean, the closest thing you had to a job, a real job of working for the man, if you will, you're working for your father, and it was still the real estate. Real estate is an entrepreneurial path because yes, you may have like an agency over top of you, but you're responsible. And I was in medical sales too for 9 years. And I was responsible for my territory. Yes, I had a company that oversaw me and who I said I represent this company, but I was ultimately in charge of my territory. And it's one of those things where, when you're a realtor, you're already an entrepreneur. So you basically went from a high school student having the best time of your life on a ski slope to not remembering a month and a half, 2 months of it, and then recovery, which is a whole nother, probably every day felt like 7 probably. So, it's one of those things when you.
Kyle, thank you for saying that because no one gets that. No one that
Yeah.
I'm like, no, time, when you're going through
time
this, especially when
stops.
you're younger, time
Yeah.
is compressed and it's like a week
Yep.
feels like 7 years, not 7 days.
Yeah, because it's such a long process, and even, if anybody has ever recovered from something major, major surgery or major accident, it's unfortunate that it's that way. It's like time flies, and all around the world, time flies when we're doing fun stuff, but then when it's down to the nitty gritty in business of healing or creating a business, time seems to crawl, and you're like, what is going on? And then you look back, you're like, boy, that was just a blip of my life. So it's this weird
Yeah.
paradigm. It's this weird paradigm. So, but yeah. So when it comes to that, it's neat that you basically started off as an entrepreneur. You never really worked for the man, if you will. So talk a little bit about just the evolution of it. I think you pretty much explained it, but what was one of the hardest parts of the evolution going from realtor into the financial part of it, then helping your dad, and then transitioning? I guess maybe my question is that transition from what you were used to with your family's company, and then taking this on your own and feeling that you had a purpose. What was that? What was the hardest part about that? You touched base on a little bit that you had this itch inside of you, but what was the hard part that day that you made that decision?
It's an ongoing thing. It's an ongoing decision and ongoing like evolution that I'm still going through.
Okay.
Which is just continuing doing what I can control and continuing to take my next step in front of me. That's all I can do. And when I was in the hospital, that's all I could do. Literally every day, whether it was figuratively or mentally, was just taking my next step. At the beginning, Kyle, I would need 3 nurses to help me sit up in bed for 8 minutes at a time, and after that, I'd be sweating profusely like I just ran a marathon. So it's just doing a little bit every day.
Yep.
And it's the same thing with my speaking right now because what I'm doing is I really feel like I'm living my purpose. So last year I spoke in the first half of 2023. I spoke 7 times, both virtually and in person for brain injury associations. And I'll just tell you a quick story if you have time for
Sure,
this.
absolutely.
I actually I started making an application to be a keynote speaker for brain injury associations at the end of summer and into the fall of 2022 for their next year's event. One of the first ones that I applied to, the Brain Injury Association of Maryland, they they said, yes, we want you. We want you to speak for our audience. So I had an additional call with them and everything. Then they sent me over the contract because the first time I did my keynote was only 35 minutes long. So I sent them the recording and I thought, okay, I'm all set. I only have to do the 35-minute recording. Then a couple months later, I get the contract and I go to sign it and it says, oh, you're speaking for 75 minutes. So I was like, hey, you guys, you can sell that other extra time. My presentation is only 35 minutes. They're like, well, you signed the contract and we're paying you. So you're speaking for 75 minutes. Is that going to be a problem? And that was kind of one of those moments where you just take a deep breath and, okay, all right. So
where can I elaborate on the step system? Yeah.
It was all I did was it was 60 minutes followed by 15 minutes of Q&A. All I did was just add in tons of stories, funny stories, from when I was in the hospital. And once I did that, I got it to 60 minutes. I remember in March of 2023, after I did it, I did 60 minutes, and then I got up to my hotel room, and I almost just took a deep breath, and I was like, wow, that was great, because the longest I had done before that was 35 minutes.
Yeah.
So I was like, okay, I kind of felt like I could do anything at that point.
Yeah.
So, sorry to go off on a tangent.
No, that's a great story. I love it. That's a story of an entrepreneur who was put instantly, like a challenge was put in front of them after they've already had something set, and they rise to the occasion. So you probably just reflected back on your step system in general. It's like, okay, how do I tackle this? When you're in a hospital setting in the recovery time that you have, I'm here to tell you, yes, when there are some funny moments during recovery. There are some significant moments during recovery, some good, some bad, some aha moments. I know one that sticks out in my mind when I was recovering from my finger chop off is I wasn't allowed to have what they call light duty work as a medic. They didn't offer it back then. And I didn't realize this, but I fell into a depression. And the day that got me out of the depression was the time when I looked up and here's a truck in front of me and I'm slamming into the truck. And now nobody's injured. Thank God when I swerved to the left to miss the truck, I caught my right side, but no one was coming towards me because it was just an instinct, move out of the way from taking the whole truck. And, it clipped my front bumper. And now I'm in oncoming traffic and, oh my gosh, I'm going to have a head-on collision. And no one was there. It's one of those divine moments where I was like, oh my gosh. So I remember waiting for the police officer to come and make the report. Police officer was somebody I knew from hockey, and our kids played hockey together. And I just sat back and I thought, okay, this was that moment that I need to get my head out of my ass and stop feeling sorry for myself and start realizing that I am in a depression. I need to go get help, and I need to figure out why I'm here. And then fast forward many years, I blow out my shoulders. And in the back of a medic, I fell in the back of the medic, and I went through 4 months worth of surgery and recovery. And I had light duty work then. My system in the 8 years since the first injury had built a light duty program. Well, now I have purpose again. I'm out. Yes, I've got my arm in a sling, but this still works. This still works great. So I went out and started educating, and I started getting in front of more educators and started educating an entire county worth of CPR experts and became kind of a go-to person to do more of our training in our system. And I did that for 2 separate 4-month stints and never once fell into depression. So no, that was not even thought of back before that happened to me. And then now you look back and the steps that it took me to not be in depression during that time of not being able to serve was being able to serve in a different manner. And you're now serving in a different manner than what you originally were put on this earth to do. And I applaud you for it. And I thank you for what you do. I've known many brain injury patients in my career. I know a few people in general that have dealt with it. I know the hardships of recovery and long-term recovery for that. And I'm glad that you're out there speaking your story, showing people that there is a chance and just being an inspiration. So I'm proud of you. I'm proud of being able to have met you and bring your message to the world.
Oh, thank you, Kyle. Thank you for giving me the opportunity to share my message with your audience. And I'm sure you and I could keep trading stories and going off one each other for the next 3 hours, but
I'm sure we can. Yeah.
we have to live real life. So,
Yeah, exactly. Well, thank you, Nick, so much. Nick did mention the way that to get a hold of him and get that free step system. It'll all be in the show notes, and it'll be underneath the video here for you to just click on. So simply, I'm going to put stuff up on the screen as well that has all that stuff. And reach out to Nick. I know I'll be reaching out to him for some other conversations as we go through this process and get to know him better and get to have some knowledge from him and his path. Share that with me as on a private level. So I can't wait to connect with you that way. And then once again, just remember, everybody, for the Ignition Path podcast, share, like, subscribe. When I say share, if you heard this message and someone needs to hear this, go ahead and hit that share button and get that message out to them to start spreading the word of the Ignition Path podcast. If you're out there listening and you're an entrepreneur and you want to come on to the Ignition Path podcast to talk about your path, there will be a link in the description below to set a meeting with me. And I'd love to have you on and hear all about your story. So once again, Nick, thanks so much for coming on the Ignition Path podcast. I appreciate it, and we'll talk to you later.
Thank you for listening to Ignition Path, fueling the entrepreneurial fire.